I knew the exact moment when something inside me finally snapped. We were sitting around my parents' dining table for our monthly Sunday lunch, the familiar chaos of family conversation flowing around me. My husband Michael was seated directly across from my younger sister Natalie, leaning in a bit too close, laughing a bit too loudly at her stories. His eyes lingered on her face with that particular intensity I once believed was reserved only for me. The worst part? This wasn't new. For months, I'd watched their interactions shift from normal in-law friendliness to something that made my skin crawl. The inside jokes, the texting I wasn't meant to see, the way his eyes followed her around the room. All while I sat silently, stomach churning, wondering if I was imagining things, wondering if bringing it up would make me sound paranoid, jealous, unstable, wondering if this was somehow my fault. But today was different. Today, I had the screenshots. Today, I knew about Veronica from his office, not my sister as I'd feared, but somehow equally devastating. Today, I understood that the flirting with Natalie wasn't about her specifically. It was about his fundamental inability to remain faithful to anyone. When Michael reached across the table to touch my sister's wrist while complimenting her new bracelet, something inside me broke free. A calm clarity washed over me, replacing months of confusion and self-doubt. I set down my fork deliberately, reached for my phone, and smiled. Actually, I think we should all see these photos Michael's colleague sent me yesterday. They're quite illuminating. My name is Rebecca Turner, Becca to most people. I'm 32 years old, a physical therapist at a sports medicine clinic in Denver's Cherry Creek neighborhood. Before my life imploded 3 months ago, I thought I had everything figured out. Successful career, 5-year marriage to my college sweetheart, a charming craftsman bungalow in Washington Park, and tentative plans to start trying for a baby this year. Michael and I met during my final year at Northwestern. He was in law school. I was finishing my doctorate in physical therapy. We connected at a mutual friend's party, bonding over our shared love of hiking, obscure indie bands, and ambitions that extended beyond Chicago. When we both landed opportunities in Denver after graduation, it felt like fate. 2 years later, he proposed during a sunset hike in the Flatirons. I said yes, without hesitation. The early years of our marriage were genuinely happy. Michael's career at a corporate law firm took off, while I built a reputation working with elite athletes and weekend warriors alike. We traveled, hosted dinner parties, discussed having children in a year or two when the time felt right. From the outside, we were that couple. The ones who seemed to have it all figured out, whose Instagram photos drew envious comments about relationship goals. The first hairline fractures appeared so gradually I barely noticed them. Michael working later and later, the decreased interest in our shared activities, the vague explanations for missed dinners or weekend plans, the phone that suddenly never left his side, always face down, always locked with a new password I wasn't meant to know. Classic signs in retrospect. But when you're living inside the slow erosion of trust, it's remarkably easy to normalize each small betrayal, to find reasonable explanations, to doubt your own instincts rather than face the truth that's swimming just beneath the surface of your carefully constructed life. Becca, what are you doing? Michael's voice cut through the sudden silence at the table. His face had drained of color, but his tone attempted authority, the same voice he used to intimidate junior associates at his firm. My mother looked confused. My father paused with his fork midway to his mouth. My sister Natalie, perhaps sensing something in my expression, shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Just sharing some interesting photos, I replied, my voice steadier than I'd expected. Everyone's always saying we don't document our lives enough. I turned my phone toward the table, displaying the first image, Michael and a striking brunette entering a hotel lobby, his hand resting intimately at the small of her back. A date and timestamp showed it was taken during his supposed business trip to San Francisco 2 weeks ago. This is Veronica, I explained to my stunned family, as if introducing a new friend. Michael's colleague. Though I think colleague might be understating their relationship based on what follows. I swiped to the next photo, the two of them at a restaurant, clearly not discussing business as they leaned across the table, hands intertwined. Then another. Leaving the hotel the next morning, Michael carrying her overnight bag alongside his own. These were kindly sent to me yesterday by one of Michael's other colleagues who thought I might want to know what my husband does on his business trips. I kept my tone conversational, almost pleasant. Apparently, Veronica has been bragging about their relationship at the office. Michael shot to his feet, his chair scraping harshly against my parents' hardwood floor. That's enough, Becca. We're leaving. We can discuss this at home. Actually, I don't think I'll be going home with you, I said, still with that strange calm that had settled over me. And since you've been so comfortable flirting with my sister right in front of me, I thought you'd appreciate the same courtesy, having your relationship with Veronica acknowledged openly rather than hidden. You're making a scene, he hissed, glancing anxiously at my parents, whose shocked expressions had morphed into something harder to read. Am I? How inconsiderate of me. Almost as inconsiderate as cheating on your wife and then coming to her family's home to flirt with her sister. My mother found her voice first. Michael, is this true? He ran a hand through his carefully styled hair, his lawyer brain visibly calculating the best defense. It's not what it looks like. Veronica is a colleague. We were working on the Hensley merger. Those photos are being taken completely out of context. Context? I laughed, the sound brittle even to my own ears. What exactly is the appropriate context for entering a hotel with another woman while telling your wife you're working late? Or holding hands at dinner? Or leaving together the next morning? My father, always the quietest member of our family, cleared his throat. I think you should go, Michael. Now. Sir, please, this is between Becca and me. Not anymore, my father interrupted, standing to his full height. Not when you bring it into our home, disrespect my daughter in front of us, and then lie about it to our faces. Natalie, who had remained frozen throughout the exchange, suddenly looked directly at Michael. Were you flirting with me to cover up what you were doing? To make Becca doubt herself if she suspected something? The question hit me like a physical blow. I hadn't even considered that possibility, that Michael's attention toward my sister might have been a deliberate distraction technique rather than a genuine attraction. The calculation involved was somehow even more sickening. Michael's expression confirmed Natalie's theory before he could formulate a denial. The slight flinch, the momentary widening of his eyes, tells I had learned to recognize during our years together. I'm going to pack a bag and stay with my parents tonight, I said, rising from the table. I'll text you when I'm ready to discuss next steps. Becca, wait. No. The word came out firm, definitive. I'm done waiting, done wondering, done doubting myself. I have the truth now, and we both need to sit with that before we talk. As I walked out of the dining room, leaving my half-eaten lunch and shell-shocked family behind, I felt a curious lightness. The weight of suspicion and uncertainty that had been pressing on my chest for months had lifted, replaced by the clean pain of confirmed betrayal. Sharp, but somehow more bearable than the fog of not knowing. In my childhood bedroom, I sat on the edge of the twin bed and allowed myself exactly 3 minutes to cry. Not for the marriage I was losing, but for the one I had thought I had. For the future I had planned that was now dissolving before my eyes. For the woman I had been just an hour ago, still clinging to the possibility that she was wrong about her husband's infidelity. Then I wiped my eyes, blew my nose, and began methodically listing what I would need from our house. Clothes, important documents, my grandmother's jewelry, the external hard drive with all my professional research and presentations, my separate checking account information. A soft knock interrupted my inventory. Natalie stood in the doorway, her expression a mixture of concern and guilt. Can I come in? I nodded. patting the space beside me on the bed. "I'm so sorry, Becca." Her voice cracked slightly. "I should have said something about the way he was acting toward me. I just wasn't sure if I was reading too much into it, and I didn't want to cause problems if I was wrong." "It's not your fault," I assured her, taking her hand. "He put you in an impossible position." "Did you suspect? About the other woman, I mean?" I sighed. I suspected something. The late nights, the business trips that seemed to multiply, the emotional distance. But I kept second-guessing myself, wondering if I was being paranoid. "How did you get those photos?" "His colleague Mark sent them. Apparently Michael and Veronica haven't been as discreet as they thought. Mark's wife is friends with me from the firm's holiday parties, and when she heard Veronica bragging about her relationship with a married partner, she connected the dots." Natalie squeezed my hand. "What are you going to do now?" "Right now? Pack a bag and stay here tonight. Tomorrow I'll call a lawyer. Beyond that." I shrugged. The future suddenly a blank canvas, both terrifying and strangely exhilarating. "I guess I'll figure it out as I go." "Mom and Dad want you to know you can stay as long as you need." And Michael left, by the way. Dad practically marched him to the door. The image of my mild-mannered father escorting my cheating husband out of the house brought the first genuine smile to my face. I would have paid to see that. "It was pretty epic," Natalie confirmed, a small smile flickering across her face before seriousness returned. "Hey, I want you to know something. The flirting? It was never reciprocated. Not once. I was actually thinking about talking to you about how uncomfortable it made me." "I know that," I assured her. "Michael's the only one to blame here." After Natalie left to help our mother clear the abandoned lunch, I called an Uber to take me to my house. Michael had texted 3 times already. Explanations, justifications, pleas to talk in person. I silenced my phone without responding and focused on the immediate next steps. The driver, a woman perhaps a few years older than me, glanced in the rearview mirror as I slid into the back seat. "Rough day?" she asked sympathetically. "Life-changing," I replied, surprising myself with the honesty. She nodded knowingly. "Those are usually rough in the moment, but better in the long run." "Where we headed?" "Washington Park. I need to pick up some things from my house while my husband isn't home." Her eyes met mine in the mirror again, a flash of understanding passing between us. "Take all the time you need. I'll wait." The house was quiet when I entered, that particular stillness of empty space that somehow registers immediately. I moved efficiently through the rooms, collecting essentials and placing them in a large duffel bag I'd grabbed from the hall closet. In our bedroom? No, my bedroom. At least for now. I paused before the dresser where a collection of framed photos documented our relationship. Michael and me on a beach in Mexico, at his law firm's holiday party, hiking in Telluride, our wedding day. I picked up the wedding photo, studying our faces, both beaming, genuinely happy, utterly convinced we were embarking on a lifetime of partnership and trust. Had there been signs even then? Red flags I'd missed or willfully ignored? The sound of the front door opening jolted me from my thoughts. I set down the photo and steeled myself, knowing Michael would have eventually figured out where I'd gone. "Becca?" His voice floated up the stairs, uncharacteristically tentative. I zipped the duffel bag and lifted it onto my shoulder before heading downstairs. Michael stood in the entryway, his usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled, eyes anxious as they tracked my movements and the bag I carried. "Please don't do this," he said immediately. "Let me explain." "Explain what, exactly?" The photos were pretty self-explanatory. "It's not what you think." "Then what is it, Michael?" I interrupted, suddenly tired of the script we were following. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're having an affair with a colleague while also inappropriately flirting with my sister, possibly to distract me from noticing the affair. But please, tell me what other interpretation I should consider." he faltered, clearly not expecting such direct confrontation. In our arguments, I had typically been the one to back down, to seek compromise, to work toward resolution. The woman standing before him now, clear-eyed, direct, unwilling to accept evasion, was unfamiliar territory. Veronica is... It was a mistake, he finally said, opting for the classic fallback. A momentary lapse in judgment that got out of hand. A momentary lapse that included multiple hotel stays and restaurant dates? That's quite a moment, Michael. I never meant to hurt you. And yet you made dozens of individual choices that you knew would hurt me deeply if I discovered them. Interesting disconnect there. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration building. What do you want me to say, Becca? That I screwed up? Obviously, I screwed up. But are you really willing to throw away 5 years of marriage over one mistake? It wasn't one mistake. It was a series of deliberate decisions to betray my trust. And I'm not throwing away our marriage. You did that when you decided to cheat. I adjusted the strap of the duffel bag on my shoulder. I'm staying at my parents' for now. I'll be contacting a lawyer tomorrow. I'd appreciate it if you wouldn't contact me directly for a few days. I need space to think. So that's it? No chance to work through this? No couples therapy? Just straight to lawyers? His tone shifted from apologetic to indignant. That seems extreme, Becca. Very unlike you. The last comment struck a nerve. Very unlike you. As if my failure to conform to his expectations of how I should respond to his betrayal was the real problem here. Maybe you don't know me as well as you think you do, I replied evenly. Or maybe this situation has shown me parts of myself I didn't fully recognize before. Either way, I need time to process without you trying to manage my reaction or pressure me into forgiveness before I'm ready. Where does that leave us? He asked, his voice smaller now. I don't know, I answered honestly. That's why I need time to think. I moved toward the door, and he stepped aside, seeming to finally understand that pushing harder would only strengthen my resolve. As I passed him, I caught a whiff of unfamiliar perfume, subtle but distinct. Not mine, probably not even Veronica's. The realization hit me with unexpected force. This might not be the first affair, just the first I'd discovered. My Uber's waiting, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Please respect my request for space. Have your attorney contact mine once I've retained one. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across our front lawn. The lawn Michael had insisted we needed when we bought the house, envisioning future children playing there. I slid into the waiting car, nodding to the driver who had kept her promise to wait. All set? She asked, meeting my eyes in the rearview mirror again. Yes, I replied. Back to my parents' house, please. As we pulled away, I didn't look back at the house or check if Michael was watching from the window. Instead, I focused on the road ahead, on the immediate next steps, on the strange mixture of devastation and determination coursing through me. The next week passed in a blur of practical activities that kept me from drowning in the emotional undertow of my imploding marriage. I met with 3 divorce attorneys before selecting Diane Levinson, a sharp-minded woman in her 50s with 20 years of experience handling high-conflict divorces. Based on what you've told me, we're dealing with infidelity, gaslighting, and potentially financial issues we haven't uncovered yet, Diane summarized during our first official meeting. My advice is to move quickly but strategically. Colorado is a no-fault state, so the cheating itself won't impact the division of assets, but his behavior suggests he might not be forthcoming about financial matters. I nodded, taking notes in the small leather-bound notebook I'd purchased specifically for divorce-related information. Compartmentalizing had become my survival strategy. Different notebooks for different aspects of my unraveling life, as if keeping the chaos contained on separate pages might somehow make it more manageable. I recommend a forensic accountant to review your joint finances, Diane continued, It's not unusual for a spouse who's been hiding an affair to also hide money. Michael handles most of our investments, I admitted. I have my own checking and savings accounts, but our retirement accounts, the house, and most of our larger assets are joint or in complicated arrangements he set up. That's very common, unfortunately. We'll request full financial disclosure and go from there. Diane leaned forward slightly. Have you decided whether you want to try to keep the house? The question caught me off guard. In the whirlwind of discovery and separation, I hadn't thought that far ahead. Did I want to stay in the house we had chosen together, filled with memories and plans that now felt tainted, or start completely fresh somewhere new? I'm not sure, I said honestly. Right now, I'm just focused on getting through each day. Diane nodded understandingly. That's perfectly normal at this stage. We have time to figure out the bigger picture as we move forward. As I left her office, a text from my clinic director reminded me that I had patients scheduled the following day, real people with real physical therapy needs who knew nothing about my personal crisis. The thought of returning to work, to the structured routine of appointments and exercises and progress notes, was simultaneously daunting and comforting. That evening, I sat with my parents in their living room, updating them on my meeting with Diane. My mother, a retired elementary school principal with a practical approach to emotional challenges, had created a binder labeled Becca's Transition, with sections for legal, financial, housing, and personal well-being resources. Diane sounds excellent, she said after hearing my recap. Very pragmatic, but also attuned to the emotional aspects. Have you heard from Michael? My father asked, his expression carefully neutral. He's texted a few times. I haven't responded directly, just forwarded everything to Diane. I twisted my wedding ring, a nervous habit I'd developed despite knowing I should probably remove it. His attorney contacted Diane this morning. Apparently he's interested in mediation rather than litigation. Of course he is, my mother said, a rare edge in her voice. Mediation would be less expensive and less public. Lawyers like Michael are always concerned about their professional reputation. Diane thinks we should proceed with formal discovery regardless, to ensure full financial disclosure. I sighed, suddenly exhausted by the legal terminology that had invaded my vocabulary in just a week. She's not opposed to mediation eventually, but wants to make sure we have all the facts first. Trust your attorney, my father advised. And trust yourself, Becca. You have good instincts. His simple vote of confidence brought unexpected tears to my eyes. How long had it been since I'd trusted my own instincts? How many months had I spent doubting my perceptions, rationalizing Michael's behavior, blaming myself for the growing distance between us? Later, alone in my childhood bedroom, I pulled out a different notebook, the personal one, where I allowed myself to process the emotional aspects of the separation. I had been journaling since the day after the Sunday lunch confrontation, finding that putting my feelings on paper helped prevent them from spiraling endlessly in my mind. Tonight, I wrote about trust, not just the trust Michael had broken, but the trust in myself that I was slowly rebuilding. The way I had dismissed my own intuition when it sent up warning flares. The clarity I felt now, even amid the pain, about what I deserved in a relationship. As I wrote, a memory surfaced from early in our relationship. Michael and I had been dating about 6 months when I caught him in a significant lie about where he'd been one evening. He had crafted an elaborate story about working late, but a mutual friend had seen him at a bar with an ex-girlfriend. When confronted, he'd turned the situation around, making me feel unreasonable for questioning him, suggesting that my trust issues were the real problem. I had apologized. Actually apologized for being upset that he had lied to me. Looking back now, I could see that moment as the foundation for the dynamic that had defined our relationship. Michael's capacity for deception, coupled with his ability to make me doubt my own reasonable reactions. My willingness to prioritize peace over truth, to silence my internal alarm system rather than acknowledge its warnings. I closed the journal and placed it in the drawer of the bedside table. Tomorrow I would return to work, face my colleagues and patients, begin the process of reconstructing a life separate from the one I had built with Michael. The path ahead was unclear, frightening in its uncertainty, but also alive with possibilities I hadn't allowed myself to imagine within the constraints of my marriage. For tonight, though, I would simply rest, gathering strength for the journey ahead. "Welcome back, Dr. Turner." The clinic receptionist greeted me warmly as I arrived for my first day back at work. "How was your family emergency?" The cover story I'd given when requesting a week off suddenly felt flimsy and inadequate. How to explain that the emergency was ongoing, that my life had fundamentally altered course? "It's being handled," I said, managing a smile. "Thanks for asking. Any changes to my schedule today?" The familiar rhythm of the clinic provided a welcome distraction, evaluating patients, demonstrating exercises, documenting progress. For hours at a time, I could focus entirely on other people's physical challenges rather than my own emotional ones. During my lunch break, I checked my phone to find 3 missed calls, one from Diane, one from an unknown number, and one from Michael's mother, Elizabeth. I returned Diane's call first. "I've reviewed the initial financial disclosure from Michael's attorney," she informed me. "There are some concerning discrepancies we need to discuss. Can you come by the office tomorrow morning?" I agreed to an 8 a.m. appointment before my clinic hours, a knot of anxiety forming in my stomach. What had Michael been hiding beyond the affair? The unknown number had left no message, but Elizabeth had. "Rebecca, it's Elizabeth. I've just heard about what's happening with you and Michael. I'd appreciate if you'd call me back. This is unexpected news." I stared at the phone, uncertain how to respond. Elizabeth and I had always had a cordial, if somewhat formal, relationship. She was a corporate lawyer herself, from whom Michael had inherited both his career path and his carefully controlled demeanor. She had never been unkind to me, but I had always sensed her slight disappointment that her son hadn't married someone more aligned with their family's professional legacy, another attorney perhaps, or at least someone in the corporate world rather than healthcare. After a moment's hesitation, I texted her, "Elizabeth, I'm at work currently but can call this evening if that works for you." Her response came quickly. 7 p.m. would be acceptable. Thank you. As I prepared for my afternoon patients, I wondered what Michael had told his family about our separation. Had he admitted the affair, crafted a more sympathetic narrative, painted me as overreacting to an innocent misunderstanding? The remainder of the workday passed in a blur of therapeutic exercises and patient evaluations. Several colleagues welcomed me back with genuine warmth, though no one asked directly about my absence. In a professional setting like ours, personal boundaries were generally respected, something I appreciated now more than ever. By the time I arrived back at my parents' house, I felt physically and emotionally drained, but also strangely accomplished. I had made it through an entire day of normalcy, had functioned professionally despite my personal world being in free fall. It was a small victory, but one worth acknowledging. At precisely 7 p.m., I called Elizabeth. She answered on the first ring. "Rebecca." Her voice was its usual measured tone, giving away nothing. "Thank you for calling." "Of course." I sat at the small desk in my childhood bedroom, back straight, as if the physical posture of professionalism might help me navigate this conversation. "I understand this must be difficult news to receive." "Michael has shared his version of events," she said carefully. "I'd like to hear yours if you're willing." The phrasing was telling. His version suggested she recognized there might be other perspectives, that her son's narrative might be incomplete or biased. It was more openness than I had expected. "I discovered Michael has been having an affair with a colleague named Veronica," I said simply. "I received photographic evidence from another colleague who witnessed them together during a supposed business trip. When confronted, Michael didn't deny it, though he minimized it as a mistake. rather than the ongoing deception it clearly was. Silence stretched for several seconds before Elizabeth responded. I see. There's more to it, I continued, deciding complete honesty was the only approach worth taking. For months before this discovery, Michael had been exhibiting inappropriate behavior toward my younger sister, flirtatious attention that made us both uncomfortable. Whether this was a genuine attraction or a manipulation tactic to distract from his affair, I can't say for certain. Another long pause. Then, surprisingly, I believe you. You do? I couldn't keep the shock from my voice. Rebecca, I've been a divorce attorney for 30 years before transitioning to corporate law. I've seen this pattern before. Her voice had lost some of its customary crispness, revealing something that sounded almost like resignation. Including, I'm sorry to say, in Michael's father. The revelation stunned me into momentary silence. Michael's parents had divorced when he was in college, the reasons never explicitly discussed beyond vague references to growing apart and irreconcilable differences. I didn't know, I finally managed. No, you wouldn't have. We kept it private, and Robert has always been skilled at maintaining his public image. She sighed, a small but telling break in her composed facade. I had hoped Michael would be different, that he had escaped that particular inherited tendency. I'm sorry, I said, unsure what else to offer. Don't be. You have nothing to apologize for. The professional distance returned to her voice. I've already informed Michael that while I will always love him as my son, I do not condone his behavior and will not be supporting his efforts to minimize or justify his actions. I blinked in surprise, not having anticipated this level of support from my mother-in-law. Thank you for that. It's not for you, it's for my own integrity, she clarified, though not unkindly. That said, if you need anything during this process, a referral, a professional opinion, even just someone who understands the specific challenges of divorcing a lawyer, you may call me. After we hung up, I sat motionless, processing the unexpected turn the conversation had taken. Elizabeth's words echoed in my mind. I've seen this pattern before, in Michael's father. The implication that Michael's betrayal might be part of an intergenerational pattern rather than an isolated moral failure was both disturbing and oddly comforting, suggesting the roots ran deeper than any deficiency in me or our marriage. I opened my personal journal and began to write, attempting to capture the complex emotions the conversation had stirred. As I wrote, a clear thought emerged through the emotional static. This isn't about fixing something broken. This is about building something new. For the first time since the Sunday lunch revelation, I felt a flicker of genuine hope, not for reconciliation, but for the possibility of a future shaped by my own values and boundaries, rather than someone else's deceptions. The path forward remained uncertain, filled with legal complications, emotional landmines, and practical challenges I was only beginning to identify. But somewhere beneath the pain and confusion, a stronger version of myself was emerging. One who trusted her instincts, who refused to minimize betrayal, who was prepared to build a life of authenticity even if that meant standing alone for a while. Tomorrow would bring more difficult conversations, more decisions, more steps along this unexpected journey. For tonight, though, I allowed myself to acknowledge a simple truth. The breaking of my marriage, painful as it was, might also be breaking me open to a more honest way of living, and that, perhaps, would eventually be worth the cost. I don't understand, I said, staring at the financial documents spread across Diane's desk. Where did all this money come from? My attorney leaned forward, tapping a highlighted column. Based on what we've uncovered so far, Michael has been receiving quarterly bonuses for the past 2 years that never made it into your joint accounts. But that doesn't make sense. We've always pooled our income. It was his idea. Actually, I tried to reconcile this new information with the husband I thought I knew. And he's been transparent about his compensation structure. Transparent about his base salary, perhaps, Diane corrected gently. But these performance bonuses were substantial, totaling nearly $160 Zawanda over the past 2 years. The money was directed to a separate account opened 18 months ago. The timeline struck me immediately. 18 months. Around when Michael's behavior had first started to shift. The increased work hours, the emotional distance, the growing secrecy around his phone and schedule. Do we know what he's been doing with this money? My voice sounded strangely calm, even as my thoughts raced. Diane nodded. Some of it has funded the lifestyle you were unaware of. Hotels, restaurants, gifts. But a significant portion was invested in a rental property in Vale. A rental property? In Vale? I repeated numbly. Michael and I talked about buying a mountain condo together. He told me it wasn't financially feasible right now. Well, apparently it became feasible when he didn't have to share it with you. Diane's directness, while painful, was exactly what I needed. The property was purchased through an LLC he created. Without the forensic accountant, we likely wouldn't have connected it to him. I sat back in my chair, absorbing this new betrayal layered atop the others. The infidelity had been devastating enough. Discovering that Michael had also been systematically hiding income and making significant financial decisions without my knowledge felt like a second earthquake shaking an already damaged foundation. So what happens now? Now we have leverage, Diane explained. Colorado may be a no-fault divorce state, but courts take a very dim view of hidden assets. This strengthens our position considerably. I nodded, my practical side engaging despite the emotional turmoil. And the property? What happens to that? It's marital property, regardless of how he acquired it or whose name it's under. We'll include it in the asset division. Diane gathered the papers into a folder. Becca, I have to ask, given these discoveries, are you still open to mediation, or would you prefer to proceed with litigation? The question gave me pause. Litigation would be more confrontational, more public, potentially more damaging to both our professional reputations. Mediation, while requiring some level of cooperation, would keep our private matters out of court records. Before discovering the financial deception, I might have chosen the more conciliatory path. Now, I wasn't so sure. What would you advise? I asked. I think we start by demonstrating that we know about the hidden assets and see how Michael responds. If he's willing to provide full transparency and negotiate fairly, mediation could still be an option. If he continues to hide information or play games, litigation may be necessary. She looked at me thoughtfully. Ultimately, the decision is yours. You're the one who has to live with the outcome. You're the one who has to live with the outcome. The simple truth of that statement resonated deeply. For too long, I had deferred to Michael's preferences, doubted my own perceptions, prioritized peace over truth. The consequences of those choices were now painfully evident. Let's show our cards and see how he reacts, I decided. But I won't be manipulated again. If there's any indication he's still hiding information, I want to proceed with litigation. Diane nodded approvingly. I'll have a letter drafted by this afternoon outlining what we've discovered and requesting full disclosure of any other undeclared assets. As I left her office, the morning sun cast long shadows across the sidewalk. Despite the emotional weight of these new revelations, I felt strangely empowered. Knowledge, even painful knowledge, was preferable to the fog of half-truths and suspicions I'd been living in for months. He bought a condo in Vale. Natalie's voice rose in disbelief as we sat in a quiet corner of my favorite coffee shop later that afternoon. After telling you it wasn't financially possible? I nodded, stirring my untouched latte. Apparently, he's been hiding significant bonuses for the past 2 years. I don't even know what to say. She shook her head. Just when I think I've processed how deceitful he's been, something new emerges. I know. It feels like peeling an onion of betrayal, layer after layer. I attempted a smile that probably looked more like a grimace. The worst part is questioning everything now. What else don't I know? What other lies have I accepted without question? Natalie reached across the table to squeeze my hand. You couldn't have known, Becca. Michael was your husband. Trust is the foundation of marriage. You weren't naive for believing him. Wasn't I, though? I heard the bitter edge in my voice and tried to soften it. There were signs, inconsistencies in his stories, changes in his behavior. I noticed them but chose to ignore them because confronting them was too frightening. That's not naive. It's human. Natalie's voice was firm. We all have blind spots when it comes to people we love. We fell silent for a moment, sipping our coffees and watching afternoon light filter through the cafe windows. Finally, Natalie asked the question I'd been avoiding even in my own thoughts. Do you think there's any way forward with him, after all this? I considered carefully before answering. A week ago, I might have said yes. That infidelity, while devastating, doesn't necessarily mean the end of a marriage if both people are committed to rebuilding. But this? I gestured vaguely, encompassing the financial deception, the pattern of lies. This isn't just about another woman. It's about a fundamental breach of partnership. Michael made elaborate, systematic choices to deceive me, not in a moment of weakness, but consistently over years. That makes sense, Natalie said softly. The hardest part is grieving for something that never actually existed. I continued, the realization forming as I spoke it. I thought we had a genuine partnership. Now I'm questioning whether that was ever true, or if I was just seeing what I wanted to see. My phone buzzed with an incoming call from Diane. I excused myself and stepped outside to answer. Michael's attorney called, she said without preamble. They received our letter about the undisclosed assets. And? My heart rate accelerated slightly. Michael wants to meet. Not with attorneys present, just the two of you. Warning bells immediately sounded in my mind. That seems convenient for him. Exactly, Diane agreed. I strongly advised against a private meeting. In situations like this, the spouse who has been hiding information often tries to use emotional manipulation to regain control once they realize their deception has been discovered. So what should I do? If you feel you must speak with him, do it in a public place and set clear boundaries about what you're willing to discuss. But honestly, at this stage, I recommend keeping communications through counsel only. After ending the call, I returned to Natalie, who immediately noticed my troubled expression. What happened? I explained Michael's request for a private meeting, watching understanding dawn on her face. You're not going to meet him alone, are you? She asked, concern evident in her voice. I don't think so, I replied, still turning over the implications in my mind. But part of me wants answers that might only come in a direct conversation. Answers like what? I sighed, finally articulating the question that had been haunting me. Like whether any of it was real, our marriage, his love for me, or if I was just convenient, a cover for the life he actually wanted to live. Natalie was quiet for a moment before responding thoughtfully. Would his answer to that question change anything about your path forward? If he said it was all real, that he truly loved you despite his actions, would that make a difference in what you do next? Her question struck at the heart of my uncertainty. Would knowing Michael's internal emotional state change the reality of his actions? Would it heal the breach of trust or erase the pattern of deception? No, I realized aloud. It wouldn't change anything practical. But it might help me make sense of the past 7 years of my life. Just be careful, Natalie advised. Michael is a lawyer. He knows how to be persuasive, how to craft a narrative. Any explanation he offers will be designed to benefit him, not to give you closure. As we parted ways outside the coffee shop, I found myself wrestling with competing desires. the need for answers versus the risk of being manipulated again. But one thing had become increasingly clear. Whatever path I chose moving forward would be based on actions, not words. Michael's behavior had spoken volumes more truth than any explanation he might offer now. That evening, as I helped my mother prepare dinner, I told her about the hidden finances and Michael's request for a meeting. "What are you thinking of doing?" she asked, her hands steadily chopping vegetables while her eyes studied my face. "I haven't decided yet," I admitted. "Part of me wants answers, but another part knows those answers probably won't provide the closure I'm hoping for." My mother set down her knife and turned to face me fully. "Becca, may I share something from my own experience?" I nodded, somewhat surprised. My mother rarely discussed her life before meeting my father. "Before I met your dad, I was engaged to someone else, a man named Richard. 3 months before our wedding, I discovered he had been seeing another woman throughout most of our relationship. She spoke matter-of-factly, though I could see old pain in her eyes. When confronted, he begged for a meeting to explain. Against my better judgment, I agreed. "What happened?" I asked, never having heard this story before. He spent 2 hours explaining how his behavior wasn't really his fault, how his difficult childhood, work stress, and even my focus on my career had all contributed to his choices. She shook her head at the memory. By the end of that conversation, I was actually apologizing to him. That's how skilled he was at manipulation. "How did you finally break free?" "Your Aunt Margaret, she took one look at me after that meeting and said something I've never forgotten. His reasons don't change his actions, and his actions tell you everything you need to know about who he really is." My mother smiled slightly. "I broke the engagement the next day. 6 months later, I met your father." She reached out to squeeze my hand. "Sometimes, closure doesn't come from understanding why someone betrayed you. It comes from accepting that their behavior reflects their character, not your worth." As her words sank in, I felt something settle within me. A quiet certainty about how to proceed. I would not meet with Michael alone. Whatever explanations or justifications he wanted to offer could be presented through proper legal channels. My focus needed to be on protecting myself and building a future based on truth, not on untangling the web of lies that had defined my past. That night, I texted Diane. "I've decided against meeting Michael privately. Please inform his attorney that all communications should continue through counsel." Her response came quickly. "I think that's a wise decision. We'll proceed accordingly." For the first time since discovering Michael's betrayal, I slept deeply and dreamlessly. The rest of someone who has finally stopped carrying a burden that was never hers to bear. The weeks following my decision not to meet privately with Michael took on an unexpected rhythm. By day, I immersed myself in work at the clinic, finding solace in the structured routine of helping patients heal physical injuries while I navigated my own emotional ones. Evenings were filled with practical tasks related to the divorce, reviewing documents, responding to Diane's questions, gathering records from our years together. It was during this process of methodical documentation that I discovered something I'd forgotten. A personal journal I'd kept during our first year of marriage. I found it while sorting through a box of mementos my mother had stored for me, wedged between photo albums and old greeting cards. Sitting cross-legged on my childhood bedroom floor, I opened the journal and began reading entries from 7 years earlier. A younger, more hopeful version of myself documenting the early days of marriage to Michael. What struck me immediately was how often I wrote about adjusting to his preferences, adapting to his schedule, accommodating his needs. Even then, in what should have been our honeymoon phase, the relationship had been subtly imbalanced, with me doing most of the emotional work. One entry in particular caught my attention. May 15th. Michael was upset tonight when I suggested we visit my parents this weekend instead of going to the law firm retreat. He said I wasn't being supportive of his career and that successful marriages require sacrifice. When I tried to explain that I've already rescheduled seeing my family twice for his work events, he said I was keeping score, and that's toxic in a relationship. Am I being unreasonable? He seemed so certain that I was wrong that I ended up apologizing, but something about the conversation feels off, like my feelings are somehow less valid than his. Reading these words years later felt like receiving a message from my past self, a warning I had written but failed to heed. The early signs of Michael's manipulation had been there all along. The double standards, the way he positioned his needs as objectively important while framing mine as selfish, his ability to turn situations around until I doubted my own reasonable reactions. I closed the journal, a strange sense of clarity washing over me. The woman I had been at the beginning of my marriage, accommodating but already harboring quiet doubts, had gradually disappeared as I molded myself to fit Michael's expectations. Now, paradoxically, his betrayal had created space for her to re-emerge, older and wiser but still essentially me. "They've made a settlement offer," Diane announced during our next meeting, sliding a document across her desk. "It's not terrible, but it's not what you deserve either." I reviewed the proposal carefully. Michael was offering a clean split of our disclosed assets, including the house and retirement accounts. The Vale property was conspicuously absent. "He's still trying to keep the condo," I noted, not entirely surprised. "Yes, and there's no mention of the additional undisclosed accounts our forensic accountant identified," Diane confirmed. "It's a classic first offer. Give up the obvious joint assets to distract from the hidden ones." "So we counter." "We counter," she agreed. "And we include everything we've discovered so far, making it clear that we expect full financial transparency before finalizing any agreement." I nodded, trusting her strategy. "What about the house? I've been thinking about that." "And?" "I don't want it," I said, the decision crystallizing as I spoke. "Too many memories, too much of Michael's presence in every room. I'd rather sell it and split the proceeds." Diane made a note. "That's perfectly reasonable. Many clients feel the same way. Any other specific assets you're particularly concerned about?" I considered the question. My grandmother's jewelry that Michael had upgraded for our 5th anniversary. The original pieces have sentimental value that can't be replaced. "We'll specify those items as your separate property," Diane assured me. "Anything else?" "Just a fair division of what we build together," I said. "I don't want more than my share, but I won't accept less either." As Diane drafted our counteroffer, I found myself reflecting on how my perspective had evolved in just a few weeks. The initial shock and pain of betrayal remained, but they had been joined by something else, a growing determination to ensure that the end of my marriage wouldn't also mean the diminishment of my financial security or self-respect. Later that day, as I was finishing my last patient evaluation, the clinic receptionist approached with an uncomfortable expression. "Dr. Turner, there's someone here to see you. I told him you don't take walk-ins, but he's been waiting for nearly an hour and insists it's important." A sense of unease prickled along my spine. "Who is it?" "A Mr. Mark Donovan. He says he's a colleague of your husband's." Mark, the colleague who had sent the photos of Michael and Veronica. I had never met him in person, having only exchanged brief texts to thank him for the information. "I'll speak with him," I decided, curious about what could be important enough to prompt an in-person visit. Mark was seated in our small waiting area, a manila envelope clutched in his hands. He stood when I approached, tall, mid-40s, with the slightly rumpled appearance of someone who prioritizes substance over style. "Dr. Turner, I'm Mark Donovan. Thank you for seeing me." He glanced around the clinic. "Is there somewhere we could speak privately?" I led him to a vacant consultation room, closing the door behind us. "What can I do for you, Mr. Donovan?" "I have some additional information I thought you should have." He placed the envelope on the table between us. "After sending those initial photos, I've been keeping an eye on the situation at the firm. Michael seems to be, well, There's no polite way to say this. He's been moving money around in ways that caught my attention. My chest tightened. What kind of ways? Client trust account irregularities, Mark said carefully. Nothing I can prove definitively as fraud yet, but concerning enough that I've documented the patterns. He tapped the envelope. This isn't just about your divorce anymore. If Michael is mishandling client funds, it's a serious ethical violation that could affect his license to practice. I stared at the envelope, the implications slowly sinking in. If Mark's suspicions were correct, Michael wasn't just hiding personal funds, he might be engaging in professional misconduct that crossed into potential criminality. Why bring this to me? Why not the firm's ethics committee or the bar association? Mark sighed. Because I don't have conclusive proof, just concerning patterns. And because Michael has powerful allies at the firm. If I raised these concerns officially without ironclad evidence, it would likely backfire on me. Again, why me? I pressed. Your divorce proceedings give you legal avenues to request financial information that I don't have access to, he explained. And frankly, I thought you deserved to know what kind of man you're dealing with. This goes beyond marital infidelity. After Mark left, I sat in the consultation room for several long minutes, the unopened envelope like a bomb on the table before me. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to focus solely on extracting myself from my marriage without getting pulled into a potentially larger scandal. But I knew I couldn't just set this aside. If Michael was engaged in professional misconduct, it could have serious implications for our divorce settlement and potentially for innocent clients. With steady hands, I picked up the envelope and called Diane. This changes everything, Diane said, reviewing Mark Donovan's documents spread across her desk. 3 days had passed since he had handed me the envelope, and in that time, my attorney had been methodically verifying the information it contained. If even half of this is accurate, Michael is in serious trouble beyond just our divorce proceedings. I rubbed my temples, trying to process the implications. So, what happens now? We have several options. Diane leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful but serious. We could use this information as leverage in settlement negotiations, essentially giving Michael a choice between a very generous division of assets in your favor or potential exposure of his professional misconduct. That feels like blackmail, I said, uncomfortable with the suggestion despite everything Michael had done. Diane nodded approvingly. It would be legally questionable at best, ethically problematic at worst. I'm glad that's not your instinct. What are the other options? We can proceed with our divorce case as planned, using the financial information to ensure a fair settlement, but not explicitly threatening exposure of the professional issues. However, she paused, choosing her words carefully. We have an ethical obligation regarding potential misuse of client funds. The information can't simply be ignored. The weight of the decision settled heavily on my shoulders. So I have to be the one to report him. Not necessarily you personally, but this information should reach the appropriate authorities, whether that's the firm's ethics committee, the state bar association, or in some cases, law enforcement. Diane's expression softened slightly. Becca, I know this isn't what you signed up for when you began divorce proceedings. It's completely understandable if you feel overwhelmed by the situation. I stared out her office window at the Denver skyline, gathering my thoughts. When I had discovered Michael's affair, my focus had been on my own pain, my own betrayal. The subsequent revelations about hidden assets had widened the scope of his deception, but still kept it within the realm of our marriage. This latest development pushed everything into a different dimension, potentially affecting his career, his professional reputation, and most concerningly, innocent clients who had trusted him with their finances. I need to think about this, I said finally, about the right way to proceed. Take the weekend, Diane suggested. We can meet again on Monday to finalize our approach. That evening, I found myself drawn to Washington Park. the sprawling urban green space just blocks from the house Michael and I had shared. I had been avoiding the neighborhood since moving out, but something about the weight of the decision before me called for open space and fresh air rather than the confines of my parents' home. As I walked the familiar paths, memories surfaced unbidden. Michael and I jogging around the lake on weekend mornings, picnics on the grass during the first summer after we bought our house, planning our future family, imagining pushing strollers along these same trails. The memories brought a dull ache rather than the sharp pain of recent weeks, like pressing on a bruise that had begun to heal. I found a bench overlooking the water and sat down, watching ducks glide across the surface as the setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. "Becca!" I turned at the sound of my name, startled to see Elizabeth, Michael's mother, approaching my bench. She wore workout clothes and carried a water bottle, clearly in the midst of an evening walk. "Elizabeth," I acknowledged, uncertain how to navigate this unexpected encounter. "I didn't know you came to this park." "I've been staying at the Brown Palace while dealing with some business in Denver," she explained, referring to the historic downtown hotel. "The concierge recommended this park for evening walks." She gestured to the empty space beside me. "May I?" I nodded, and she settled on the bench, maintaining a respectful distance. "How are you doing?" she asked after a moment of silence. "Honestly, I'm not sure how to answer that question anymore." I sighed, surprised by my own candor with this woman who would soon no longer be my mother-in-law. Every time I think I've grasped the full extent of what's happening, another layer reveals itself. Something in my tone must have alerted her. Has something new come to light? I hesitated, unsure how much to share. Elizabeth was still Michael's mother, despite her unexpected support of me during our initial conversation. Yet something in her direct gaze encouraged honesty. "There are indications of potential professional misconduct," I said carefully, "beyond the personal and financial deceptions." Elizabeth closed her eyes briefly, her composed exterior cracking to reveal genuine pain. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Just like his father." We sat in silence for several minutes, both watching the darkening water, lost in our own thoughts. Finally, Elizabeth turned to face me directly. "Becca, may I offer some unsolicited advice? Not as Michael's mother, but as someone who has walked a similar path." I nodded, curious despite myself. When I discovered Robert's, Michael's father's professional improprieties, I chose to protect him, to handle it within the family, as he put it. Her voice held no self-pity, only clear-eyed assessment. I convinced myself it was the compassionate choice, the loyal choice. In reality, I became complicit in his behavior and enabled its continuation. It was the biggest mistake of my life, and others paid the price for my silence. Her words hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. "What would you have done differently?" I asked. I would have honored my own ethical compass rather than subordinating it to misguided loyalty. I would have recognized that true compassion sometimes requires difficult choices. She met my eyes steadily. "Michael is my son, and I will always love him. But love without accountability isn't really love at all. It's just enabling." As darkness fell over the park, Elizabeth and I parted ways with a brief, surprising hug. "Whatever you decide," she said, "make sure it's a choice you can live with long-term." These moments define us more than we realize at the time. Walking back to my car, I felt a strange sense of clarity beginning to form. Not about what would be easiest or most comfortable, but about what was right. Monday morning dawned clear and crisp, the October air carrying the first real hint of the approaching winter. I arrived at Diane's office with my decision firmly made, the restless uncertainty of recent weeks replaced by calm resolve. "I've thought carefully about how to proceed," I told her, settling into the now familiar chair across from her desk. "I want to handle this situation with integrity, regardless of how Michael has behaved. Diane nodded encouragingly. What have you decided? First, I want to continue pursuing a fair divorce settlement based on complete financial disclosure. No leveraging the professional misconduct information for personal gain. I took a deep breath before continuing. Second, I believe we have an ethical obligation to report the potential misuse of client funds, not out of vengeance, but because it's the right thing to do. I agree completely, Diane said, approval evident in her voice. How would you like to proceed with the reporting aspect? I think the most appropriate path is to provide the information to the firm's ethics committee, with copies to the State Bar Association. I had researched the options thoroughly over the weekend. That follows proper channels while ensuring the information can't be easily buried. Diane made notes as we discussed the specifics of implementation, timing, documentation, necessary precautions. By the end of our meeting, we had a clear plan that balanced my right to a fair divorce settlement with broader ethical responsibilities. You're handling this with remarkable grace, Diane observed as I prepared to leave. Many clients in your position would be tempted toward more vindictive approaches. I considered her words. It's not about grace, really. It's about reclaiming who I am after years of compromising my values to maintain a relationship that wasn't what I thought it was. I don't want to leave this marriage as someone I don't recognize or respect. The consequences of our actions unfolded rapidly over the subsequent weeks. The firm's ethics committee launched an immediate investigation upon receiving our documentation. Michael was placed on administrative leave pending the outcome. The State Bar Association opened its own inquiry. Through his attorney, Michael finally agreed to full financial disclosure and a settlement that fairly divided all assets, including the previously hidden ones. Whether this change of heart stemmed from genuine remorse or simply recognition of his deteriorating position, I couldn't say. Perhaps it didn't matter anymore. On a bright November morning, I sat in a small conference room at the courthouse, signing the final divorce papers. Michael wasn't present, having opted to have his attorney handle the proceedings. A small mercy that spared us both an unnecessarily painful encounter. As I signed my name for the last time, Rebecca Turner, reclaiming my identity along with my independence, a profound sense of closure washed over me. The past few months had been the most difficult of my life, yet I emerged with a clearer understanding of my own strength, values, and worth than I had possessed in years. Outside the courthouse, Denver sparkled under autumn sunshine. I took a deep breath of the crisp mountain air, savoring the simple pleasure of making choices based solely on my own preferences. Today, I would celebrate this milestone with my family. Tomorrow, I would tour the apartment I was considering renting in a neighborhood I'd always loved, but Michael had dismissed as too bohemian. Next week, I would begin exploring a professional opportunity that had recently presented itself, a chance to open a specialized physical therapy practice focused on women's health, something I had dreamed about but set aside during my marriage. My phone chimed with a text from Natalie. All done? We're ready to celebrate whenever you are. I smiled, typing back. Just finished. Free woman now. Be there in 20. As I walked toward my car, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in a store window, shoulders back, head high, moving with a confidence I hadn't felt in longer than I cared to admit. The woman Michael had gradually diminished over years of subtle manipulation was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, wiser, and infinitely more authentic. The road ahead would undoubtedly hold challenges, uncertainties, and moments of doubt. Healing would come in irregular waves rather than the neat, linear progression I might prefer. But for the first time since discovering Michael's betrayal at that fateful family lunch, I felt genuinely optimistic about the future, not despite the collapse of my marriage, but because of the clarity and strength I had found within its ruins. Some endings, I was learning, are actually beginnings in disguise. This one was mine to shape however I chose.